It's now time to go live, and it is my great pleasure to welcome Andy Long, board member of Pentland Brands, Josie Morris, MD of Woolcool, John Elkington, founder of Volans, and our facilitator for this session, Charlotte Sewell. Charlotte is an independent facilitator, former head of social impact for family food business Cook, and she played a central role in bringing the B Corp movement to the UK. So we couldn't be in better hands. Thank you very much to the four of you for being with us today. I'll now hand you over to Charlotte to introduce the panel, set the scene, and start the conversation. There will be a time for Q&A at the end. So you may like to switch your cameras on if you haven't already, so that our panel can see who they're talking to this afternoon. Thank you so much. Charlotte, over to you.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth, and it's lovely to be here today, and a real tough act to follow after some awesome broadcasts. So thank you for setting us off so well. So what I'd love to do now is hand straight over to the panelists. As Elizabeth says, there's going to be lots of opportunity for Q&A at the end of this panel. So please do send your questions in on the chat as we're going, and we'll make sure that we capture those and give some time to question and answer at the end. So with no further ado, I'd love to hand over to the panelists, and I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourself, describe what your business does and what your role is in that organisation. So over to you first, Josie.
I thought you might pick on me first. Okay, thanks. Hi everyone, I'm Josie. I am the Managing Director at Woolcool. We are a family business. It was started by my mother, and we produce insulated packaging using sheep's wool, so a sustainable alternative to polystyrene, and typically used to ship food and pharmaceutical products.
Thank you, Josie. And over to Andy.
Andy Long. I'm a board member at Pentland Group, which is one of the UK's largest private businesses, and we're on the second, third and fourth generations of family. I'm currently transitioning out of my role as CEO of Pentland Brands, where I was the first non-family CEO of the sort of long-term family business, which you may not have heard of, but you'll be aware of some of our brands, including Speedo, Berghaus and Elas.
Thanks, Andy. And John.
Well, John Elkington. I'm a founder and chief pollinator at Volans. We set the company up in 2008 in the teeth of a financial storm, and here we go again. We mainly try and work with business people, regardless of whether it's sort of publicly owned, privately owned, whatever, and get into their brains and meddle with their wiring, because by God, we all need that done to us. So looking forward to the discussion, Charlotte.
Thanks very much. Okay, so we've been given a really big topic to discuss today. We're going to be talking about the role of business in tackling the climate and ecological crisis. And just to kick us off, I'd love to hear a little bit from Andy and Josie about some of the things that you're proud of in your business or businesses. So maybe some particular steps that you've taken to reduce or improve your environmental impact, or ways that you think your organisations are beginning to tackle this climate crisis. Who'd like to jump in first?
I go first on this one, seeing as you had. I guess I'd pick a couple of things. One is about approach, and I should say up front, for a start, you know, we're in the textiles, the apparel industry. It is a big carbon emitter. You know, we recognise that's a problem in terms of the place it's starting from. It also employs roughly 75 million people around the world. So, you know, there's value in getting this right. I wouldn't by any means hold us up as exemplar. You know, I think what we're on is we're on that path that recognises the problem and that we have to play a role. I'd point to two things I'm pretty proud of in that. One is we have a long history of collaboration in our industry, working with the people that we are otherwise competing with. That dates back to getting stuck into human rights stuff, which my chairman started back in the early 90s. We were founder members of the Ethical Trading Initiative, recognising the challenges there. As we started to confront the impact our industry was having on climate change and the need to become more sustainable, we looked for those same opportunities, and we were a founder member of something called the Sustainable Apparel Coalition back in 2012. that was really the first time, and driven by people such as Patagonia, who were really leading the thinking at this stage. And we just took a view very quickly that this was a journey we needed to be on. It was going to really matter, and that we weren't big enough to figure out some novel answer. We needed to work with others and go on that journey. I think then if I point to something that we've specifically done off the back of that, the place we've really made the most progress, I think, is environmental sustainability of fabrics. So again, we've looked for external support, external partnerships. More than 55% of our fabrics are now Blue Sign certified. And more and more of our stuff is recycled polyester. And we're really making sure that that's one of the areas we make as much progress as we can, as quickly as we can, recognizing that it both has a fundamental need, but is also a message that we can engage consumers about.
Thanks, Andy. And just for people who don't know, Blue Sign certified?
It's one of a number of external bodies who will work with you to make sure that the fabric you're using has the lowest possible impact throughout its life cycle. We're not yet at the point where everything can be circular, which I think would be the aspiration, but at least it starts to put you in the right direction.
Brilliant. And then Josie, so we're kind of zooming out from Andy's look across a whole range of brands. And then I think you might have a different perspective being in a smaller organization.
Yeah, sure. So we're obviously an SME. So I think the first thing I totally just want to echo what Andy says is I think any business who claims to be perfect is hiding something. I think every business has impact. And I think we certainly know we're not perfect. There's things we do that we can be better at. And so I think from that point of view, I think, having that starting point of what are you trying to improve and those baby steps towards those improvements. And I think what we've been really reviewing in the last from a macro level, from a kind of business level, we decided to apply for our B Corp certification. And that was something to allow us to start measuring some of those impacts. It's really difficult to measure impact. Like, what is impact? What does that even mean? Like, you can have an impact walking down the street, you can have an impact walking to work, you can have an impact driving a fast car or a slow car. I'm looking at cars outside where I'm saying cars, but I think from a impact perspective, I think it's quite difficult, particularly as a business, to think there's so many things I could do, but what can I actually do? And so B Corp was something that has allowed us to focus on some of those things. And if we're looking kind of on a bit more of a micro level, one thing we did before we got B Corp was to review. Our wool liner has a plastic cover, and we reviewed how we reduced the amount of plastic we're using within that bag, that cover. So we managed to reduce that down through development. We don't yet use bioplastics, but that's a whole of the conference, isn't it? That's one thing. And then I think the other thing is, as well as environmental climate, is almost, I guess, making sure that socially we're looking at some of the things we're doing with our team to improve their, I guess, their own aspirations and where they want to go, which I think it's social and environmental impact is kind of inherently linked. So yeah, that's there. I mean, if you pick up two, probably the B Corp and then the measurement of, say, a plastic, for example, or material use.
Thanks, Josie. Yeah, I loved it when we were chatting about how exactly you measured how you could reduce the plastic liner by, looking at different ways of processing and the different ways that your customers were using it. It's really fascinating. So John, I know you end up having a little bit of a different perspective because you spend a lot of time looking at a whole range of organisations and the different ways that they work. I guess I wonder if I could ask you a slightly different question, which might be, are there any examples you could point to which have been signs of hope for you recently? So maybe some changes you've seen particular businesses make?
Well, let me just pick an example that's very recent, which several weeks ago, one of the world's largest family-owned businesses, Walmart, the world's largest retailer, their CEO, Doug McMillon, many people on the call may well have seen his 14-minute video. If you haven't, go to the Walmart corporate site and just look for Doug McMillon and regeneration, and it will come up. And what's extraordinary about it is that he's not just simply saying Walmart's going to be responsible, or that over time it's going to be a more resilient business through its supply chains and so on. It's actually committing to becoming regenerative. And for me, that is extraordinary because, earlier this year, I did a book called The Green Swans, and the subtitle was The Coming Boom in Regenerative Capitalism. And I think a lot of people probably thought I was completely insane, and just perhaps I am mildly delusional at times. But you're starting to see some very large companies starting to signal some really quite interesting commitments. Now, in this particular case, Paul Hawken, who many of you will know, I think sort of was responsible for about 95% of Doug Macmillan's speech. But nonetheless, the very fact that it's being said and it links the circular economy with climate change, with regeneration, it's not just one piece of the puzzle, it's the whole lot. And I think they have the power to force that through or encourage that through their supply chains in a very powerful way. I find that very encouraging indeed. I hold no brief for Walmart, incidentally. I don't particularly like them as a company, but their ambition I endorse.
Brilliant, and actually maybe even more interesting when it's coming from organisations that you don't naturally like. Yeah, really interested by that. So one of the talks that we heard before was from Christiana Figueres, and she talked a lot about her belief in stubborn optimism. And I loved a lot of what she was saying. One of the things that really struck me was the emphasis that she put on procrastination. And she asked us all to challenge ourselves to think about what we've been procrastinating about on this issue of climate change. And I'd love to put that question out to all of you. I don't know who to challenge first to admit what they feel their organisation might have been putting off working on. Andy, do you want, oh, Josie, go on, you're putting your hand up.
I thought Andy, you go first if you like.
Go on, Josie, yeah.
Yeah, so I think for us it was probably looking at carbon footprint. That's something that, I mean, originally it was procrastinating about whether to do the B Corp, but I think, thinking about it now, I think probably carbon footprint, because it's such a complex issue. I think, carbon footprint, it seems like wherever you put your lens is measured. So, you might talk about the carbon footprint of the UK, but you might forget about all of the manufacturing that's going on abroad. You might talk about, the carbon footprint of one car, but forget the fact that electric cars still use energy. So I think it's a hard one to do. So that's why I've been procrastinating out of that one. We've just started our carbon footprint analysis, and there's a lot of spreadsheets, and there's a lot of delving into information that, you have to go and ask suppliers and all sorts, and they're asking you why you're asking the question. But yeah, that's a challenge. And I think that's like with anything, I think it depends where you put your lens. But yeah, they're the reasons behind that as well.
Thank you, Josie. And I love admitting that maybe the combination of spreadsheets and complexity is enough to put you off it. I'd love to hear, actually, how does it feel now you've started measuring it?
I mean, I think I'm someone who just wants to go and do something, and I don't really want a barrier in front of me where I'm sat at a spreadsheet. But then at the same time, it's something I've really wanted to do for a while. And to be honest, some of it is time and resource. We are an SME, so the resources, some of us, but I'm taking the lead on it a little bit. But yeah, it feels good. And what I want to try and do is, even if it takes a year, or even takes 6 months, however long it takes to do, is get it right, so that the information we're providing is actually a good reflection rather than just something that we've rushed and made up. Yeah,
thank you, Josie. Okay, Andy, your turn.
I should have insisted on going first because my answer is actually the same. And that's probably quite a good thing, because it also links to what we just heard from the Apple exec. We've done a lot of work on our directly controlled footprint, and the bottom line is there's a lot of easy stuff that you can do there, because where you're in control, you can minimize your usage, you can invest in green energy, and we've done both of those things, and then you can offset because you're really, really clear where it sits. That is great. I'm pleased we've done it. It's something we've been doing over quite a few years, and it barely scratches the tip of the iceberg in terms of really getting into this whole third-party supplier and usage. Now, what's interesting is, in many cases, so in the industry I'm in, we're making an awful lot of our products, as people would expect, in Asia. We obviously saw that piece about the electric buses in Shenzhen, which I'm familiar with. And I saw a comment in the chat actually about how much of that is made by coal. And yeah, the answer is 50% of the Chinese grid is still fueled by coal. But what I can tell you from personal experience is just how rapidly that's changing and how big a problem they recognize it to be. And on a really local level in Shenzhen and Hong Kong, the improvements in air quality there have been over the last 5 years. Apart from this year, I'm a frequent visitor, and you've really seen the benefit. And the reason I draw that point out is, that's where this collaboration really matters, because as we as purchasers talk to the people we're working with on measuring and really caring about that entire carbon footprint, so that goes back up through the system, and they're looking at what is the power that's fueling their factories. If you're working in South China, there's a heck of a lot of sunshine, so there's been a big investment in solar panels and what have you, and all of it moves the needle ultimately. But yeah, it's same as Josie. Unfortunately, our spreadsheets are huge, are multifaceted. And by the way, one aside, which I'm sure we're all suffering with, is and we'll have seen a massive improvement this year because of all of the factors relating from the pandemic, and then getting back to a new normal sometime in 2021 without losing all of that progress is going to be a big challenge in and of itself.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that. How do the changes that we've all made that we didn't expect to make this year translate into things that we might review going forward? I wonder if we might sort of launch into that next, actually. So, John, Andy was talking about how fast he's seen things change just in terms of China and the fuel it's using. I wonder if there are any other signals of change like that you've particularly observed recently that demonstrate a shift.
I think the simple answer is absolutely. And one of the extraordinary things about the pandemic is that the sustainability and climate change agendas have continued to build through this period, whereas in previous sort of societal pressure waves, the interest has fallen away quite sharply at a time. So I think, firstly, that's something that I take great comfort from. Just one quick reflection on Christiana's point about procrastination. I love it to pieces, but I don't think that procrastination is always a bad thing. I'm a great procrastinator, and I think sometimes your default setting is to go incremental, and you just do it because it's not important. You just get it done, and it's out of the way. And I think increasingly now we all have to step back a bit and reflect before we step forward and step up or whatever, because we're now dealing with systemic crises that need systemic solutions. And that's, most SMEs haven't got a clue what that means and what they could do about it or whatever. But nonetheless, I think they've got to find allies, they've got to find partners, they've got to find platforms which are addressing this sort of systemic elements of the crisis. One other thing, well, Lisa Jackson from Apple was on, and I've used Apple technology for well over 20 years. I loathed that company's environmental positioning for decades. I mean, it was ridiculous. I mean, they'd have all of their glossy ads and profiling, and then they'd have this grotty sort of green little bit of a web page and so on. And yet now with Lisa in there, they're really driving this. They're really thinking about circular economy and 100% renewable energy. So it does take time for some of these companies to really start to move forward. The final thing is, I spent 5 hours yesterday, of all people, with the Ministry of Defense. I'm no great advocate of defense either, like Walmart, but this was a major security review that's been launched to look at climate change, look at the climate emergency. And, the top admiral was basically saying, all of these countries around the world are now declaring climate emergencies. Almost certainly the future of the armed forces in this country, the United Kingdom, is going to have to be built around climate. We've really got to understand that in much greater detail. So, all of this is sort of mainstreaming. And I almost wonder whether the sustainability industry that's been building towards this for so long isn't about to be outflanked. We may just be overtaken by people saying, well, you didn't have the answer when we wanted it, we'll go elsewhere for it. Now, I'm not pessimistic, but I actually think that we've all, again, got to step up.
Yeah, that is fascinating, isn't it? Who is going to be kind of turned to for the answers. Yeah. The thing I love when I'm talking to John is I never quite know who he will have been chatting to last. And yeah, Ministry of Defence, fair enough. But I think that does start to show how many different perspectives are waking up to climate change in different ways than perhaps we've seen over the last 20 years. I wonder, Andy and Josie, whether the time that 2020 has given us in different ways during the pandemic has nudged you to think differently about topics that maybe you wouldn't have thought you'd change your mind on, or to talk to us a bit about how the challenges of 2020 have changed your perspectives.
Shall I go first on this one? I think in this case, you're actually really testing the assumptions about the way we work is probably going to have the biggest impact. And I suspect I'm not really telling anybody anything there, but yeah, the most powerful way to make sure that our travel footprint, which is not insubstantial, doesn't leap back up next year, is the fact that we've barely spent any travel budget this year. And so, like any good business, we'll be saying, well, how much are we going to allow it to go back up next year? And it's prompted a proper debate. And you know, if I think about the work from home dynamic, I've spent a number of years saying to our organization, finding more flexible ways to work is really important. I am of a generation where I still think of work as a place. And we've had to accelerate that shift to disconnect the place and what we do. And I think what we've also all been through in parallel is disconnecting where we are and how we work. And the sort of thing that will make a massive difference in our industry, just to make that really granular, is going to virtual samples. So samples get shipped back and forwards until they're right, creating physical waste, creating travel waste, packaging. It's about developers really feeling that they've got to have touch, feel themselves, and so they've got to go into factories. And this year has forced us to figure out what we can do. And you don't realize until you go through what we've been through, and I'm sure everybody's got a list, just how many things we maybe don't challenge ourselves on. And I think I'm pretty good at stepping back and going, are you sure, are you sure, are you sure? And my list is pretty long already in terms of, I didn't really need to do it like that. And so, there'll be a whole bunch of things where we can accelerate progress. We'll do a little bit more than we have this year, but we'll bank a good proportion of the shift that we've seen.
Interesting. Yeah, those ways of working and how that can actually prompt innovation that will also reduce your environmental impact. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that with samples. Yeah, fascinating. Josie?
I think a lot anyway. I spend my time thinking. I think the problem with lockdown is then you spend a lot of time thinking in your house. So instead of going shopping or going, I don't know, out somewhere, you end up then thinking. So I think I agree with Andy. I think it's changed the way people think about work maybe a little bit. I think I'm I don't know what generation Andy is, but I'm kind of the view that maybe I'm a social person. I think it's exclusive to each person, an individual to each person. I love seeing people. I love seeing, sitting next to them, I love bouncing off the energy of them. I think there's a mental health thing. I know everyone's really bored of all these topics in a sense, because they are, in the media always. But from a mental point of view, I think individuals sitting in an office together, bouncing off each other, has a really good way of pushing a team together and making you feel better after a day that's maybe a bit tough. And actually, what was really interesting in lockdown was we continued through lockdown. We were classed, I don't even know, I hate the term key worker because I don't see ourselves as key workers in comparison to nurses and doctors, but because we supply into the food sector, we were classed as, we had to stay open. So we sent all of our office team that could work from home to work from home, and obviously our warehouse team stayed. But the office team, actually what we saw was like a morale being built between them. And what was really interesting from so I play team sport, and you learn your most of your learning comes from when you lose together, and that's when you create your best bond, because you go through that challenge. And if I think back, when we won, it's great, you feel great. when you lose, you all, I say cry together, but you're all pretty gutted at the end of it. So I think what we found here though was because we're all going through the same challenge together, it kind of, you know, helped to boost morale in the office almost. So when they all came back in, it felt as though they all knew each other a bit better. And I think I know this is off the topic climate change, and I will bring it back to that, but I think the thing it has done a little bit is I think it's made people think a little bit more about other people. Now, the ship sailed a little bit recently because I think people are getting frustrated, but there was, particularly in the early days, that thing of actually, how can we help each other? How can we, you know, I dropped some stuff off to my next door neighbour, who I never speak to, like, you know, those kind of things. I think from a climate point of view, actually what's it shown for me is you can make excuses about not doing things, but then you can pull it out of the bag last minute and spend some money on something that quickly. So use a government example. And I don't claim to know a lot about how the government works internally. I'm sure it's complex. But if you can pull out the bag of furlough scheme that quickly, why haven't you done something about climate change? You know, why haven't you funded something somewhere else? And again, I'm being very general and probably a bit of a tweeter saying that. But yeah, that's kind of my thinkings really. And I think the other thing I just want to say, which I was thinking while Andy was talking, is, you know, when you go on a diet and you do a fad diet and you might lose a bit of weight and then you put it back on, and you do another fad diet and you lose a bit of weight, put it back on, I think it's baby steps, isn't it, with climate change? And I think perhaps some of it is around not seeing it as a fad diet and just fixing here and fixing there and fixing there. Is actually going, okay, I'm just going to change the way I eat a little bit, and I'm going to do a bit of exercise as a starting point. And I know that's a little bit off your question, but I just wanted to say, because I will forget it if I didn't. So
no, I think you're right, Josie, and that chimes a lot with what John was saying about incrementalism, right? Yeah. How do we get this combination of sort of the mini pace yourself, mini sprint or fad diet to get something done, and then how do we also think long term? I also really like the way that you did talk about the role of team culture, because I don't think that is separate to climate change. And I actually think that it's a real key to getting to work on these hairy problems is you need that morale, and you need those team supports, and you need people looking out for each other. Because, you know, if the TED Talks that we've just heard are anything to go by, we have got a lot of work to do in this decade, and some of this work is going to feel exhausting. And actually investing in team culture is, I think, going to be key. I mean, I don't know if Andy or Josie or John want to jump in on that, but I definitely think people and environmental impact should not be separated.
I think just really quickly on that, and then you guys talk, is I think one of the things that massively has been highlighted is how important good leadership and open leadership is. And I think I have a lot to learn. I'm not perfect. And, you know, everyone has both light and dark, don't they, as J.K. Rowling said. So I think everyone has their positives and going on. So you know how much I love Harry Potter. So I think from that point of view, you know, actually, though, it's about good leadership and recognizing people have flaws and recognizing people have their bad days and the good days and whatever. But actually, I think one of the things we've massively missed in the last probably 3 months particularly is good leadership. And I think 2020 has highlighted how important across the world good leadership is, and the impact of bad leadership. And I think that is true whether you're looking from a government level, or you're looking at companies taking responsibility for what they do, or you're looking at a captain of a hockey team, or you're looking at a school teacher as a leader of those children they're looking after, or a doctor. I think it's key across the board. But again, it's an opinion, and you know, I don't claim my opinions are facts. That's just my observations, I think.
Yeah, I think good leadership is so embedded in this. It's just what John was talking about in Apple's transition and how the role of an individual can be super powerful. I think, Andy, you were going to jump in.
I was going to say, and I think it's leadership culture, and I think it's one of the things that family businesses have been big in a sustainable way. My background before I joined Pentland was in listed businesses, and you always had the sort of underlying corporate culture, and then you had cycles of the CEO's tenure that would define, you know, the way the business was led and what the latest sort of cultural buzzword was. You know, family businesses does tend to be more sustaining and can be put to really positive use in this sense, where that responsibility is shared through the organisation. You know, one of the things our chairman has done is founded the Pentland Centre for Sustainable Business at Lancaster University, and it's fabulous because it means we've got a resource that's kind of got our name above the door that we can call on to get into some of these difficult questions. But the real power is the message it sends out to people in our business that, you know, the family that own the business, that pay their wages, really care about this stuff. And so when I, as an exec within the business, try and engage people, I'm not really having to sell them on it. You know, that cynicism that I've maybe encountered elsewhere just isn't there, because the culture has made sure that, you know, everybody understands that this is part of what we see as important as a family business.
That's fascinating. I guess that's just such a good example of how you're walking the talk in a way. You're going to invest in an organization like that. I also wonder, Andy, if that can take some of the spreadsheet weight off your hands. I've certainly found the power of academic partnerships to get some geeks to help you out with your spreadsheets. Can be amazing.
The other thing it does is it means we can have the most awkward conversations we need to have in private, because we can reach out to people directly. And yeah, that's fantastic. So our industry gets a lot of attention from NGOs. You know, we partner with NGOs and trade unions in various ways, but actually being able to engage with these academics and say, you know what, tell us how bad it is, and then we can start to think about, right, where do we need to go, where can we make a difference? And yeah, there's a degree of cynicism in there for all of us, isn't there, wanting to be on the right side of history, but you know, actually that's really powerful to say, right, you know, where is the thinking? You know, talk to my people and tell me what just doesn't resonate, doesn't land. So it's a brilliant resource to be able to use.
Yeah, that's really interesting actually, about how you find a place to have those authentic conversations, and maybe a place that's safe where you can finally measure this stuff. I mean, Josie, you talked about that in terms of your B Corp certification, but I definitely think that's a key in terms of making sure you're getting somebody to give you the critical friend kind of feedback that you need, and working with academics can be a great way to do that. Josie started to pick on, you know, the role of government in issues like climate change, and certainly the announcements that we've heard over the last 2 days are perhaps some real signs of signals of change in the UK on this. I'm particularly interested to hear what you all think about the role of business versus, say, government or charities to really make waves in taking action on climate change. Who wants to jump in first? I'll accept a hand up. Oh, go for it, John.
Well, I'll perhaps start. And the first thing, I just wanted to underscore what Josie said, which is that leadership has been shockingly poor in recent years in the public sector. I mean, particularly in this country, but you know, you look at the United States, you look at Brazil, you look at Turkey, you look at India, you look at China. Everywhere there is this problem of leadership. And increasingly, whether Putin or Xi or whatever, they're wanting to cling on to power for life. I think Trump probably wanted to do the same. And I think that signals something that's going to happen relatively soon, certainly within this decade, which is that you're going to have a massive clear out of leadership, more in the public sector than the private sector, but it's going to happen every which way and everywhere. And I think it has to, because the thing that really worries me, and it has done for quite some years now, is younger people. Increasing, there was a piece in the Financial Times this morning, for example, talking about a global study that's just been done, showing that younger people are now starting to distrust and dislike older people. Now, we can have our dislikes and whatever, but I actually think that's immensely dangerous, because climate change and these systemic challenges require intergenerational cooperation sustained over not just decades, but over generations. And it's easier to say that, but at the moment we've got a fragmentation across the generational landscape. And I think that's really problematic. And I think somehow, I mean, it's extraordinary. You have somebody like Greta Thunberg, who sort of ends up 15, 16-year-old talking to the UN, the World Economic Forum, and all the rest of it. That's fine, but that's one individual. And the question is, how do we now get younger people into decision-making at every level, both in the public sector, but also in companies? And just finally, one of the most interesting projects that we've been doing this year is in Spain with Acciona, who are a family-owned infrastructure and renewable energy business. And we've taken 27 of their younger people and brought them into a process that helps them shape, and they're from around the world, not just from Spain, to shape what was originally going to be the sustainability strategy and is now the company strategy. And it was originally going to be for 5 years. It's now for 10 years. However we do it, we've got to get young people in and not just simply dump all of this on them. We've got to help them, support them, fund them, mentor them if that, but it goes every which way. Just a thought, which I don't think has been properly covered as yet, but I think is critical.
Yeah, that's awesome. So much there. John, can you say the name of that firm again?
Acciona, ACCIONA.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I'm really fascinated in this piece around reverse mentoring. I think organizations that are doing that are really benefiting. And actually the other thing you mentioned about how something that might have been shoehorned into a sustainability strategy where it's perhaps siloed with blending into the core strategy, and time and again it feels like that piece around integration is really essential, as well as those longer term horizons. So I don't know, Andy or Josie, whether you want to pick up on that point about the voices of young people or the role of business, but take it how you'd like to.
I don't know. Andy, do you want to go? Shall I go?
Much politeness here, guys.
Don't want to hog the conversation. I clearly have can chat forever. So the role of business, so my view is business is, okay, again, opinion, and again, not perfect. So I think for me, a business leader has a responsibility. So Spider-Man said Spider-Man's uncle said with great power comes great responsibility. And I think that is true. I think you can then choose to use that force for positive or not so positive. And then as a business, obviously you have a responsibility on all angles. So I think we're talking about environment here, but you have social responsibility, but you also then have a responsibility to keep your business going. If you've got 50 members of staff and you have to make a decision about whether to do a decision that's going to shut your business down and they're going to lose the jobs or save the business, then that's a moral dilemma. What do you do? So I think it's about trying to do the right, fair thing. And I think trying to take on board all of the, juggle all of the complexities and all of the, whether it's right wing, left wing, whether it's social media abuse, whatever it is, juggle it all and then make the decision, and then the factual decision based on facts around what perhaps is the thing that feels the best thing. And I think if that's done with the best intentions at heart, and that's done not selfishly and thinking about the community as well, I think then you can't go too far wrong. But I think as a business leader, you've got a platform, haven't you, really? If you've got 50 people in your team and you've got the ability to kind of give them information that isn't biased, is, here's a signpost to this, here's a signpost to that, then actually it makes sense. If you can educate them about, here's some information about, we did a wellness week, so, here's some information about how you can maybe make yourself a bit more healthy, choose to use it or not, like it's not going to be forced on you, but here's some information. And we want to do an environmental week this year, but lockdown put pains that a little bit, but that kind of thing. And then the thing about young and old is, as I say, the business I'm in was started by my mum, and I think as a youngster coming in, I thought that I knew a lot, and then I think what I quickly realised is it's respect both ways. And I think young people, I don't know where I sit right now, whether I'm young or old, but from a youth point of view, I think young people think that they're right, and I think old people think they're right. And I think sometimes we've lost the art of debate to go, well, actually, you're both right. There must be a middle ground between you two, and I think it's having that open-minded, not to just think your opinion's right. Like, it's not right always, or there's someone who might have, it's your view and it's shaped by what you do, and there might be someone opposite you who has a different view, but it's shaped by what they do, and you can find a middle ground. Like, there'll be somewhere in between the two that you can both go, yeah, I'm happy with that. Yeah, I agree though, youth need to come through to have the ideas, but I think there also needs to be respect from the youth for the older generation that have experience and know why things have happened, and it works both ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think this point about polarization, we're seeing polarization around the world in so many different ways, and actually we can't afford for a generational polarization to slow us down in making this progress that we really need to make. There's a wise leader in the B Corp movement who's based in Sistema Bay in Latin America, and he says it's more important to be together than to be in agreement. And I think so much that is the case. How do you get around the table and be together? Andy, what do you want to say about young and old in business?
So I guess a few thoughts. The first one is I haven't seen the article that John references, but I'm sort of surprised that the younger generation aren't more annoyed with the older generation. The rise of populism has challenged social progress that we've made over the last couple of decades, or over many decades, but in my life, visible to me over the last couple of decades, if you like, and just at a time when actually we really need to double down and do far more. And sort of this rise of kind of denial and hanging on to what I've got as the issue. And I say that very clearly sat in the middle as the cusp Generation X. I really feel for the younger generation. I sort of almost feel like the pandemic's been the sting in the tail. The irony of young people losing out economically and, welfare-wise, to extend the lives of older people, and it's and I accept that that's a take without sensitivity, but at its really simplest level, I think is reflective of the challenges that we've had over the last few years, and is going to be something that's going to be so important to make sure that we correct as society going forward as we come out of the pandemic and hopefully rebuild better. Second thought is the role that business can play. I think businesses can and do play a really positive role, and I think it's been more obvious in the last few years where the governmental momentum has eased. An example I would offer that isn't environment but is about social justice would just be businesses' response to Black Lives Matter, after the death of George Floyd and through the summer, where you really did see businesses recognizing a need to make a statement. And yes, okay, some of that was, bandwagon jumping and what have you, but even that is interesting, that business felt that it was something they needed to respond to. And certainly many of the businesses I'm close to and have been involved in, it's forced a far more profound, where are we really at? Have we really put enough behind it? And that's not being driven by government, that's not being driven by legislation, it's not being driven by immediate financial benefit. It's genuinely, we want to be on the right side of this, what do we need to do? Last point I'll make is just, family business is a really interesting place to be in this context. And I pick on two particular reasons. Firstly, the long-term view that comes with being a family business. It makes that what side of history do I want to be on question far more relevant, because I'm not thinking about what's the exit in 2 years and am I going to be able to scrape through and get away with that and sell out at high value. Most family businesses think about it in generational terms, and that makes a big difference. And the second piece I referenced earlier, I've got generations 2, 3 and 4 in the business today, and making sure those voices are heard and can be representative of the different world the generations are seeing is both really important and really powerful, because you get a different type of conversation than that which I've experienced before, which is, whether we think we're a meritocracy or not, there's an element of gerontocracy in most organizations that you're not going to get past.
Yeah, certainly. I really want to talk to you about how that works with generation 2, 3 and 4. And I'm sure that people listening will have observations and questions from their own perspectives. We're probably going to have one more question together, and then I want to put it out to the Q&A and address some of the questions that have been coming through in the chat. So do add your questions in the chat if there are things you want to grill Andy, Josie and John about in more detail. I don't know which bits of what Andy's just said I most want to draw on now. I mean, I'm particularly interested in this piece about how businesses can respond perhaps faster than government. I think the Black Lives Matter momentum over the summer this year has been a really interesting case in that. And I think actually it links so beautifully to what we were hearing from Apple earlier. Actually, that is not distinct from how we need to respond to climate change, because there are justice issues that are so deeply embedded. And actually, if we can tackle this in the round as a climate justice piece, we're going to make much more progress than if we just think of it in terms of carbon, or we just think of it in terms of the environment, if we can really address that and around that, will change our thinking. And you did mention at the end why it's a bit different if you're a family business. I've got to observe this from working in a family business recently when I spent time at Cook. I'm interested, I mean, John's comment about a time that he had really seen young people get involved at a board level. Doesn't surprise me that that was in a family business. Josie or John, I don't know if you just want to come in on that. Do you think it's different if you're a family business and you're thinking about climate change? What makes it easier? What makes it harder?
John, do you want to go?
Well, very quickly, family businesses cover the spectrum. They're good, bad, and ugly. We all know that. But they do, at their best, have something that many publicly listed companies struggle to achieve, which is that sense of an intergenerational space. And I think that's worth gold dust, not at a time when change is incremental, but when we're going through a period of profound disruption. And I think the next 10 to 15 years are going to see immense disruption. And just a final point, I think Rebecca Henderson's book, I think, is extraordinarily worth reading. And basically what she and others are now saying is that capitalism is in fundamental ways broken. It's not valuing the right things. It's not pricing the things that we need to price in the right way. So we're not saying, you know, if you're an entrepreneur or an innovator or whatever, you should wait until the economics are sorted out. But it's interesting, isn't it, that economists like Mariana Mazzucato, like Kate Rayworth, like Rebecca, are starting to play into this space. And I think we've got a collective challenge in sort of putting some real wind into their sales. I think it's an immensely exciting time in economics. And I say that as somebody who gave up economics after 1 year in 1968, very long time ago.
Josie, over to you.
From a business point of view, I think I agree with John. I think there's good and bad in every type of business. I think the difference with a family business is you can't escape the family in a family business. Like, you know, I work, my sister's the FD and my mum is still involved. I see my sister every day, and, you know, I don't see my mum as much as I, you know, have done in the past, but you can't escape that. Like, that's always going to be there, and no matter whether you're a massive, you know, unless whether you're a family you've got one person on the board making the decision for the family who are in your ear back at home, or like, you know, a big group, or you're a small family business that is thinking about the team. And I think the difference with a family business, I think it's a bit more emotional within a family business. I think, and I don't mean that fluffily, I just mean that I think because it is the future, because it is, you're building something as a family, I think that's something, I guess it's something we've tried to harness as well, is that family mentality, because I think you get more buy-in, you get more, they get a better culture out of people feeling involved and feeling included. And the one thing that was quite interesting that I learned from a generational point of view was, I think my mum's on this call, so is that there was decisions that were being made in the past that when I came in, I'd suggested to change them. And so this is going back actually to what we're saying about generational. And, you know, I became so change that. And what I realized was that I didn't do it very sensitively. And what I should have done was explain that when those decisions were made, they were right and they were the best decisions. And that's why we're where we're at now. But they needed to then evolve to the next stage. And I think it's having that respect and recognizing also that you're talking to a parent, or you're talking to, you know, my mum might be CEO and I'm sometimes talking to her as her daughter and sometimes talking to her as the MD. And the same with my sister, she's FD, so, you know, FD, MD, butt heads, but generally we get on really well. She's my sister. So I think that's what makes a family business different, is you're not just battling with business, you also got your family and your connections and your history, which my sister's much older, but we grew up we grew up together, obviously. But, you know, we've known each other for the whole of my life. Like, it's a long time to know someone. So you've got that history, you know your weak points, but you know your strong points too. So I think that's what makes it unique when it comes to particularly small and medium. And I don't know if I've just answered your question, but yeah, I think.
Oh, I think you have. I think you've sort of really brought to light everything that we were hearing when we were listening to Ronan Krznaric, I think that's how I say his name. He talks a lot about being a good ancestor, and actually it's almost like if you work in a family business, that's part of your DNA, and you're forced to think like a good ancestor all of the time, which I think is really interesting. And that's actually why I'm fascinated to talk about climate change with a whole bunch of family businesses, because I think you've got that in your DNA, and you're particularly well placed to have these conversations in ways that, as John was saying, capture a whole range and breadth of generational thinking. So it is now officially time when we are due to go to Q&A from the audience. And I know I've got one question here from Sarah Dean, and I like it because I can actually see Sarah on the screen. So hi, Sarah, thanks for your question. And do put your videos on. It's lovely to see you while we're going through your questions. So Sarah asks you, sometimes consumer perception is inaccurate with regards to products that damage. How can we educate to affect real change? So I think this is such an interesting one. Whether it's because a product is being marketed as eco-friendly when maybe it really isn't. How do you navigate this? I mean, Andy, you must see this in all sorts of ways. You know, about the technology of fabrics. I don't know. How do you want to?
I saw that question when it came in, and I thought, you know, actually the biggest response I can offer is acknowledge it's a long game. So, you know, I can remember being in conversations 15 years ago about the risk of greenwashing, and we were surrounded by examples of greenwashing, and it was a new word to me at that stage, and it was, you know, getting our heads around the concept, and you know, let's not make those mistakes. And we had examples that were inside, we had examples that were outside. You know, let's build some really solid foundations. Let's talk when we're ready to talk. And I think the most important thing is accept that you're not going to get every win along the way. There's going to be the really cool product where you've just got your head in your hands and you're going, but nobody's asking the questions I want them to ask. Yeah, I'm not going to name any names, but you know, I could, from a human rights point of view or a sustainability point of view, reel off a list of things, you know, I've seen along the way that you just think, yeah, they're getting away with that, aren't they? And yeah, it's had to be about accepting it's a long game. And I think, you know, we've talked a lot about what are the opportunities of the pandemic. The reality is, after the financial crisis, we saw consumer propensity to make choices based on, you know, the perceived impact on the world around them go down rapidly, because people focus on, you know, what do I need for me and my family? And so there's every possibility that we're going to go into a couple of years of seeing that again. And yeah, all I can offer is it's about, you know, doing the right things for the right reasons and recognizing that over time, yeah, that comes together with what matters, whether that's from a consumer point of view or a legislative point of view.
Interesting. Yeah, where does the legislation come in? I'm really interested in that, and especially how consumers are going to react after this crisis. John, I wonder if you've got a sign of hope. Do you agree? Do you think we're going to see a downturn in environmental purchasing?
I think we're going to see several things happening at the same time, and one will be a protracted downturn, I think, because lots of different countries have spent a huge amount of their collective treasure, and they're going to have to pay that back, and that's going to be tough, and it's going to be a protracted decision. To the question of how we get information on products and their impacts, both negative and in some cases positive, into the minds of ordinary people, into consumers. I think that there are several groups of people who are absolutely essential. I think scientists have been much sort of disparaged in recent times, particularly in the United States, but they are essential. We have to have science-based approaches, whether it's to climate change or whatever it is. The second group are NGOs. Again, NGOs have been slightly on the back foot for a while now, because, you know, their glory days have been past, and you know, they're trying in some cases to reinvent themselves. And yet I think activists and campaigners and NGOs are absolutely fundamentally important. I think teachers are immensely important, and it's unfortunate that for so much of the last sort of 50, 60 years, there have been individual teachers who inspired and got, almost like David Attenborough on television. Certain individuals can get people thinking about stuff, but most have failed. And I think now we've got to find ways of getting the right content in front of everyone, not just in particularly favored students. And the last one probably is investigative reporters. Again, slightly on the back foot. Media companies investing less in investigative journalism, and yet it's essential. That's very often where you find out the bad news about companies or products or supply chains or whatever it might be, what those companies don't want you to know about. That's not going to change. I mean, Andy was talking about greenwashing. Well, it's been around for generations. False facts have been around for hundreds of years, and they're not going to go away just because Joe Biden gets in. We're stuck with false facts. We're stuck with people having the wrong end of sticks, and that's why I think those 4 different professional roles are so important.
Fab, thank you. Yeah, how do we look at this from many angles? And yeah, whether that's turning to academic experts, media, investigation. Yeah, there are many ways to consider this. We've got another quite meaty question, which is linked to this. This talks about an article in the FT claiming that sustainable fashion, there is no such thing. And is particularly asking, how do we break the habits of consumption and sort of reprogram consumers in ways that organizations like Patagonia might be trying to do? How do we reprogram the ways that consumers buy things? I mean, I know Josie's done work on this with her consumers, thinking about how do they actually buy a product that maybe was seen as disposable and use it again. I don't know if you could touch on that for us briefly, Josie, and then we'll just go to the others with the question that came in, which was, what's your view on this issue of growth versus regeneration? So Josie, I don't know if you could tell that story about how you use packaging in a circular way, and then we've got to wrap up after that.
Yeah, sure. So I'll be really quick. So growth versus regeneration. My answer to that is I don't believe in growth at all costs. I really believe in sustainable growth. And I think actually, if you want to be a business in 10 years' time, you probably need to factor in sustainable growth rather than growing 100% a year or whatever that is. You know. And some of your measurements can be around sustainability. In terms of what we try to do with our product, with it being a sustainable product, well, with it being seen as a green product, a green fluffy product, cottage industry, hippie smoking pipes, all those kind of things, being wool, we had to re-educate, we had to, explain what wool is, what it does. We went through, going back to that last question, went through all of that process really for 10 years. David Attenborough did a massive favour in changing people's perception of sustainability from a nice to have to a must have. But I think we set up a chain where our customers can send the wool back to us to be reused. And the idea being it's a slow burner, it's something that doesn't get taken up by loads and loads of people, but to get people to start thinking about either sending it back to us or how can you reuse this packaging within your home? And that's just a really micro on our business level, which is just literally what can we do on a small level to see our material being either reused or recycled in a way that doesn't just go into the ground. And even if it goes into the ground, to be fair, it breaks down. But I think it's getting people to think about packaging not just as a throwaway commodity maybe.
Yeah, thank you, Josie. Anyone else? Your last 2 cents on regeneration versus growth. I'll go to Andy and then I'll go to John.
I was about to say, I probably should respond given it's a fashion reference. So first thing is I accept the overall premise of the piece that the FT did, that consumption is absolutely part of the answer. Now, I'm in a privileged position in answering that because more of the products that I've been involved in are about developing products that will last, and it's part of that promise. And I think it speaks to some of that price difference. I commented on how people shop in recessionary times. Some of our brands like Speedo and Berghaus, where it's higher priced than the average for the market, but it's a proposition of long lasting, do better in recessions because consumers change their behavior to say, well, I'm going to buy it once and I'm going to make it last. And apologies if that sounds like a plug, but the reality is that's going to have to be part of it. And it comes back to, you know, what's the role government's going to play? How do we make sure capitalism properly prices in the whole impact? You know, when all that stuff starts to happen, the choices that consumers make will be based on a price tag that more fully reflects the inputs of what you've got, and you know, that's the way it will have to go. Thanks,
Andy. So keeping it for longer, whether it is your wool in your packaging or your jacket. So final words from John?
Well, just simply, tomorrow I speak virtually in Catalonia, in Barcelona, and my first slide basically has a visual which says, in fashion, everything is now circular, but nothing is circular. I really don't trust the fashion industry, current company accepted, to do this right, because the fashion industry plays with new emergent memes and trends and so on, and then it dumps them. We have to try and do our best to get the fashion world to pay attention, but I think they're the last group that will totally 100% get this. And on regeneration, I think it is the coming theme. You know, I've spent 40 years trying to get people to talk about sustainability. I don't think sustainability is going to go away, but I do think it needs to be given some oomph. It needs to be redefined. And I think resilience and regeneration are absolutely central in what comes next. The danger is that language will be used very loosely and therefore diluted out of sight. We've got to fight to prevent that and make sure that people understand regeneration for what it is, which is genuinely economically, socially, environmentally, politically creating a better world, and not just trading off, but really doing this in an integrated way. So family businesses, critical role to play in all this. I look forward to watching that as it happens from a safe distance. But Josie and Andy, I love your stories. Would love to know more about those later on.
Thanks so much, everybody. And I know we've still got some questions remaining in the chat. I invite Andy, Josie and John to tap away and respond in the chat if you'd like to. And I know that we'll be handing back over for some more broadcasts now. But thank you so much to Andy, Josie and John, and to everyone for all your questions.
Thank you all.
Charlotte. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, Andy, Josie and John. That was incredibly inspiring. I think that was a very rich and thought-provoking session, and we're very fortunate to have you with us today, helping us make this IFB TEDx Countdown event so very special. You shared more than I could possibly try to summarize, but I was personally struck by the polarization you spoke about and the need to heal the generational divide. That's going to be another big and important conversation. And Josie, I loved what you said about learning the most when we lose together. We're now going to switch back to pre-recorded sessions, and I promise you that the talks continue to be absolutely fascinating. We'll hear from Sophie Howie, who is the world's only Future Generations Commissioner. What a title. Philosopher Roman Krasnarek will talk to us about being time rebels, after which we'll hear from writer Andri Snare Magnusson, who joins us from Iceland, sharing with us the story of the world's first glacier lost to climate change. Before we hear from Prince William, who, inspired by President Kennedy, invites us to set ambitious goals and go for what he calls our Earth shot. And we finish on a very powerful note with a poem by a young American poet and activist, Amanda Gorman. If you don't know her already, I have a feeling it's just a matter of time. I hope that you enjoy this final part of our event. And if you're leaving us here, thank you so much for joining us.